Thanks again for your interest in Adoniram Judson and the beginnings of the modern mission movement. We've been talking through this in our last several sessions to probably bring some kind of order to this event that happened 200 years ago. 1812, 1813, 1814 is when we talk about the modern mission movement beginning from the United States. And it has to always have the name of Adoniram Judson in it. That's the namesake of Judson University, where we are today. And again, I need to repeat, my theory is that this is the most significant event in Protestant history since the Reformation. We need to give our nod to Martin Luther and the beginnings of the Reformation, but the most significant event since then would be 1812, 1813, 1814. So we've talked about what the world looked like back then, 200 years ago. We talked about Adoniram and those forces at work in his life that would call him forward to be that first missionary. And we got Adoniram and Anne and George Huff and his wife placed in Burma, and the beginnings of the mission movement started. In this little session, let's talk about the struggles. And again, humans are known for organizing things, and so we would call this the 1820s. Maybe let's say 1820 to 1832, but let's just call it as a round-off number the 1820s, when things were rough, things were not good. He got to Burma, remember, in 1813. So there is about 6 or 8 years of things getting wrapped up, warmed up, learning the language. And it's such a small little movement, the government doesn't know it's there, doesn't worry about it being there. It's not an upsetting force or anything like that. But by the beginnings of the 1820s through about 1830, 1832, we'll call that the period of struggle, period of when the mission movement was going to make it or not make it. Remember, our first missionaries are Anne and Adoniram Judson. They are soon joined by the Huffs, the printer, but then they're joined by two missionary families by the name of Wheelock and Coleman. And the Wheelocks and Colemans, they kind of disappear in this story early on because they die. They're only there, all four of them are gone within 2 years, which brings up the first struggle that these missionaries are going to face. It's going to be disease. It's going to be a set of diseases that they had never encountered in Boston, in the United States. Diseases such as cholera and tuberculosis and malaria and the bloody flux, you got me, and all of those kinds of things, and fevers that we probably don't even have names for today. And there was no quinine. There was no modern medicine. The only thing that they had going for them is that by this time they had learned to do vaccinations against smallpox. And that was kind of just by an accident that Mr. Jenner noticed that the milkmaids in England never got smallpox. Why? Well, there was something, they had a minor disease called cowpox, and the milkmaids never got smallpox because they had cowpox. And so they had figured out some little vaccination. But what they're treating diseases with is such things as bleedings and leeches and diuretics, everything that would dry you out and everything that would not work to combat those diseases. So we've got two missionary families that's dead. We've got a new missionary that arrives by the name of Price, Dr. Price, and you can call him doctor. He's an MD. His wife lasts 5 months and she dies. But Price has some skills which bring some attention. In other words, he's really good at doing eye work and glaucoma work. And so he gets a reputation around Rangoon of being able to cure blindness. But at this time, Anne gets sick. We've lost the Wheelocks, we've lost the Colemans, we've lost Mrs. Price. Anne gets sick. And so Anne leaves Burma for 2 years. She's gone for 2 years back to England and back to the United States to clear what they tried to call liver disease. And what do? They attach leeches to her, they bleed her, they do everything wrong in trying to cure liver disease. But back in the United States, she does gain her health. Now, this is the period of when the struggles are the best, the worst, the strongest, the mightiest. We've got disease running through these missionaries from the West who do not have any natural immunizations against the tropical problems that are in Burma. Anne is gone. The only people left are Judson, Adoniram Judson, and Dr. Price and the printer Huff. And so they're all in Rangoon. They get a call, that's not a phone call, they get a message that the emperor would like to meet them. We talked previously about the first trip to see the emperor. This is the second trip to see the emperor. And so they go up the Irrawaddy River. They go up the Irrawaddy River from Rangoon to Ava to meet with the emperor. What he wants to do is meet Dr. Price. And in meeting Dr. Price, he's impressed. He actually has four conversations with Price and Judson. Remember, the first trip to meet the emperor was a waste of time. He just said through one of his viceroys, "I'm not interested in your religion, I'm not interested in your books, take your books and leave." But at least he didn't throw him in jail. So this time he has four conversations with Price and with Judson. And he asks the question, if people become Christians, do they have to dress like the Portuguese? Okay. Now the deal was the Portuguese had some commercial influence. What are we talking about? Colonialism. Remember when we started, we were talking about colonialism. The Portuguese had arrived and had, well, do they have to dress like the Portuguese? In other words, are they going to become Portuguese? Are they still going to be Burmans if they adopt this new faith that you're bringing into our country? He asks Price a lot about medicine. He eventually gets to Judson and says, "Now what do you do? Are you a medicine man?" And Judson says, "No, I'm a teacher." And he asks, "What do you teach about the Buddha?" Judson has to answer that in front of the emperor. "Oh, you are a preacher. Preach for me." And Judson, sitting there cross-legged in front of the emperor, is supposed to preach. It's one of those things you're not prepared for. You got me? And so he begins preaching a sermon, sitting there in front of the emperor. This is the second trip to see. Now remember, Anne is gone. Anne's back in the States trying to recuperate. And sure enough, whatever happens worked out, we think, well. Because the emperor invites Price and Judson to move to Ava. All right? Now that means you can get out of the lowlands down here and come up to the highlands where it'll be a little healthier. And so Price stays up here and will spend the rest of his life in Ava. But that's really not very good. I'll explain that here in a minute. Judson goes back to Rangoon and waits for Anne to return. So in 1823, she returns, December 1823, and January 1824, they move the mission headquarters from here up to Ava. And so we have Price and Judson in Ava, but in February of 1824, the British invade Burma. Now you got me? We were talking originally about colonialism and how colonialism had all of these Western nations moving in and taking over different parts of the world. So the British take Rangoon, and on June the 8th, whenever the message gets up here to Ava that Rangoon has fallen to the British, they throw everybody in prison that is British. Well, Judson looks British. He's Caucasian. You know, if you've seen one white guy, you've seen them all. So he gets thrown in prison with the other Brits that are there. There's probably about 8 of them altogether. But they do have charges that come against Judson. And we need to be aware of that and be honest of that. Because Judson got paid through a system that they had worked with the British missionaries in India. And so the Americans sent his check to Britain, to India. And in India, he picked up his, the money was given to a courier, and the courier then brought it to Rangoon. And Judson would sign a receipt saying, I received $200 from Mr. Gauger, was his name, G-O-U-G-E-R, Mr. Gauger. So they've got these receipts here that Judson is getting money from the British. So they assume he's a spy being paid by the British. You understand the confusion of how international transfers of money? So he's in jail now for 17 months. And this is, remember our conversation today, is the struggles of this is the worst part of his struggles physically. Now when you get thrown in prison in Burma in 1824, they really don't provide any food. They don't provide you a television or a channel changer or anything. You're thrown in a cave. The prison system is run by other prisoners. You got me? Condemned prisoners. Probably lifers. And they aren't very respectful of God or man. And it's tough. Judson's feet are tied together. Judson's feet are tied together most of the time. Now when I say tied together, maybe 6 or 8 inches. And it would affect the way he walked till he died in 1850. Short steps because of the fetters that bound his ankles. Help me out, Skylar, and let's talk about how that prison experience would impact him for the rest of his life. Whenever he's in prison, lay down here and help me out. Nighttime comes, and it's time to go to sleep. And so, sure enough, his ankles are tied together, and the guards come in, lift up his ankles, and run then a bamboo pole between his feet like that, and lift the bamboo pole up, and he sleeps on his shoulders like that for the 17 months that he's in prison. That's not very comfortable. Are you aware of that? And it's really quite debilitating, so you're not getting any rest. Thank you, Skylar, for helping me out. You're in a cave environment where all the water collects and all of the cucarachas and vermin and all of the bugs and everything else. The hero during this period has to be Ann Judson. And if anybody becomes a saint out of Baptist life, it would have to be Ann Judson. Ann brings food to Adoniram every day, 17 months. I should say she actually took 20 days off because she had a baby. And that may be the only maternity benefit that the mission board provided her. That's a joke. But she took 20 days off having baby Maria, but every day she would come. Now, in our conversations earlier, we talked about how bold Ann was coming to ordination and meeting people and getting to know the viceroys and the wives of the viceroys and that kind of thing. She would go daily, deliver food to Adoniram, and confront the local officials. My husband is an American, he's not a Brit, let him out of jail. Well, that didn't work. But she was aggressive and knew enough people that she did her best to get him out. One of the things that happened while in prison was the king, the emperor. The emperor realizes that there in the city of Ava is a lioness. And what is the mascot of the British Empire? The lion. And so he puts the lion into prison. Are you with me? Think there's some symbolic thing here of the lion being in the prison. I've now got the mascot of the British Army in the prison. Well, the lioness wasn't much help. He starved the lioness to death, which meant the lioness was always, you say, growling or yelling or crying or screeching, whatever it was. And the lioness eventually starved to death. They would try to feed the lioness dogs and pitch dogs over there. And at some point, the lioness got so weak, she could not even go after the dogs. Now, you got a dying lioness for about 2 months in the same prison that you're in. Now, she does spend time in a cage, which is only about 3 feet high and about 5 feet long, not long enough for that lioness to turn around. After all, this is the mascot of the British Army, and it's now in my jail. So it's not going to be comfortable for that lioness either. Eventually, the lioness dies, and Anne convinces the guards to put her husband in the lion cage. Why? It gets him out of the cave so there's fresh air, circulating air. There's sunshine. Are you with me? And he doesn't get to stand up. He's in the lion's cage, but he's healthier in the lion's cage than at any other time in prison. And at Judson University, the trustees open every meeting of the trustees with this gavel, which was made in 1883. And it contains over here a slab out of a memorial stone. But over here is a sliver out of the lion's cage in which Adoniram Judson stayed while in prison. And our trustees use this 3 times a year when the trustees meet to gavel this university together to remind us of the struggles that our namesake went through while in prison in Burma. Now again, Anne is keeping him going. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the head of the prison comes in to select one person to be executed. Any volunteers? What happened was that he ended up picking Burmese thieves and Burmese rapists and Burmese thugs that were in the prison for execution and did not select Adoniram Judson and did not select those 4 or 5 British guys that were in there with him, and Dr. Price, who's in there also. Does not select them, and they make it through all 17 months without being selected to be executed. Why? Anne is coming every day with food, and she's bribing the guards. Bribing the guards, yes, we have to admit it. She was bribing the guards with food, or she was bribing the guards with the silver from her silver service back at the house. And these guys were saying, well, shoot, we ought to be keeping these Westerners alive because this lady's feeding us too. And this lady is bringing us some silverware under the table, so we might get a butter knife tomorrow. You got me? And so through her wiliness and through her hard work, Anne Judson keeps Adoniram and the rest of them alive. Now there's actually 2 phases to the prison experience. The general, during the midterm of this, we're in 1824, 1825, the general of the Burmese army is killed, so a new general is appointed. Remember, they're battling the British. And the new general says, the reason that we are losing this war is that we are out of favor with the forces of the universe. It's hard for a Buddhist to say God. So we're out of favor with the forces of the universe. And so he says, we're going to march all these Westerners to the new prison and we're going to kill them all. The death march. So as you're reading Judson, you'll read about the death march to the second prison where they were all supposed to be executed so that they would now win the war. Well, that general didn't last very long, and he didn't get time to get them executed. They would finally make it through the war. What happens as the British continue to conquer more and more of Burma? Now remember, they got up here to Ava because of Price and because the emperor wanted to know more about this medicine stuff. As the British Army gets closer and closer up here, they decide they had better plead for terms of surrender. And the only person they can find in this part of the world who can know both English and Burmese is who?
Judson.
So Adoniram Judson is brought out of prison to start writing and negotiating surrender conditions and peace treaties. Now he's still a prisoner, but he is out of prison, and those kinds of things. Are you with me? And the British leader that's coming up is the name Archibald Campbell, and Archibald Campbell wants his Brits freed from prison, and he wants. So he tells the emperor, free all of those people, free all of the foreigners. That's what he says. Free all your foreigners from the prison. And the emperor replies, okay, I'll give you all the British guys, but this guy, Price and Judson, they're our people. We're keeping them in prison. And suddenly the emperor says, we want Judson and Price on our side. But Campbell keeps pushing and gets them out of prison. So we have sort of ended the prison phase. Are you with me? So Anne, very weakened Anne. She had a baby named Maria. They go south and go over here to Mull, Maine. We're now moving the ministry to Mull, Maine. But the British and the Burmese still need Judson to negotiate treaties. So they ask him to come back to Ava to negotiate one more treaty. Judson says, no, I don't want to go. But they bait him by saying, we will get in that treaty religious toleration, which is what he'd wanted, religious toleration. And so Anne says, okay, go back, rewrite those treaties, see if you can get religious toleration in there. And Judson goes back to Ava, and whenever he's in Ava, 1826, September of 1826, well, he gets the letter in October. October 1826, he gets a letter sealed with a black piece of wax. A letter saying that his wife, Anne, has died. Okay, are you with me? We're marching through the 1820s in the struggles. First of all, disease and poor medicine and not knowing what to do with all that. And all your compadres dying or having to go back to the States and to get some kind of remedy. We've been through the war. We've been through the prison experience. And now my wife dies. And I'm not even there when she died. I'm off